My name is Nancy Gohring. I'm a senior analyst at 451 Research, and I'm going to be talking today about machine learning and AI in ITOps. There's a lot of buzz right now around AI and machine learning and ITOps. A bit of confusion, a bit of people trying to understand what's interesting about it and why everyone's talking about it. So there's some pretty important drivers that have created this interest in applying machine learning in an ITOps environment. And from a big picture, it's related to the modernization of application environments. So you used to have these pretty basic application environments. Now, a modern application might use multiple clouds, you might be using containers, you might be using microservices, maybe relying on a whole bunch of third-party services to drive your app, and each of those pieces is generating some kind of ITOps data. So many organizations are finding that they're sort of drowning in ITOps data. It's much harder to analyze that data to try to find the root cause of problems so you can solve them very quickly. And so this idea of applying more advanced analytics like machine learning to this huge and growing volume of ITOps data emerged as one approach to how to deal with this influx of IT operations data and continued pressures to try to respond quickly when performance problems occur. Platforms in the monitoring universe I define as software or a service that includes 3 or more sort of distinct capabilities that are really well integrated. So as an example, you might see a monitoring vendor that offers APM, infrastructure monitoring, and logging, and does so in a very well integrated way. So that, for instance, if you were using infrastructure monitoring to detect when a problem is occurring in your application, you could see that in the monitoring service, and then automatically the monitoring tool would pull in relevant logs so that you can very quickly go from identifying a problem to identifying the source of the problem and fixing it. So that's how I define a platform, and that would be as opposed to standalone monitoring tools that tend to do one thing and do that one thing very well. So it might be a niche application like database monitoring that does that one thing and does it very well. We did some analysis here at 451 of revenue of vendors, and I looked at platform vendors versus the standalone vendors in terms of revenue, and discovered that they were relatively equal. But the interesting thing was that there were many fewer platform vendors. So there were about 9 platform vendors that made up about half the revenue in the market, and something like 80-something standalone vendors that combined made up the other half. So I'm really seeing a very strong interest in the platform approach. I'm seeing more organizations choose or at least express interest in platform monitoring options. So choosing a monitoring tool that does multiple things, like maybe APM, infrastructure monitoring, log analytics, versus a whole host of standalone tools. And there's a number of interesting drivers for this decision and some really particularly interesting upsides. So one of the key drivers is that in modern application environments, organizations are finding that they're collecting a much bigger volume of operations data. And sort of the knee-jerk response is to add more tools, right? So add another monitoring tool that collects a certain type of metric or log and does a certain kind of analytics. But the result has been tool sprawl, and a very siloed environment. So they're collecting all of this interesting, useful operations data, but it's siloed in individual tools. And these organizations are discovering that without being able to correlate across those tools, it's much more difficult to troubleshoot and discover what the cause of a problem is and then fix it. So that's really one of the biggest drivers that I'm seeing for the platform approach. And once organizations choose a platform monitoring tool, they realize a whole bunch of upsides. So some of them are really basic. right? So you only have to interface with one vendor. Tool management might become easier because it's just one tool. But when it gets really interesting, it's in the capabilities. So it's much easier, it can be much easier to correlate data across types of monitoring tools if those monitoring tools are combined within one offering. So while you can often integrate tools from different vendors, it's much easier if those capabilities are integrated and sort of under the umbrella of one vendor. And what ends up happening is that data is automatically correlated so that you can much more quickly understand when you've got an alert storm going on, which alert is really the interesting one. What's the root cause of this problem that's setting off all of these alarms? These types of tools can also allow interesting integrations across, say, metrics-based tools like APM or infrastructure monitoring, which are typically used to alert someone that an issue is going on, with a log analytics tool, which is typically used for troubleshooting. So you might turn to an infrastructure monitoring tool to figure out that there's a performance problem going on, and then within that tool, it automatically surfaces the relevant logs so that you can very quickly turn to solving the problem. So these are some of the biggest upsides that I'm seeing and the big drivers behind the growing interest in the platform approach in monitoring. I'm seeing some interesting additional upsides or benefits for businesses that are adopting the platform approach in monitoring. So typically, organizations choose platforms because of ITOps drivers, right? So they may be consuming or collecting a much larger volume of IT operations data because of an increased complexity in their application environments, and hiring or using a platform monitoring tool can address the tool sprawl issue that sometimes happens when organizations are sort of drowning in IT operations data. And so there's some really great benefits that IT operations teams are realizing from choosing platform monitoring tools. But once they begin to realize those initial benefits, they may also begin to recognize some additional use cases. So usually the platform tools embrace machine learning or other advanced analytics approaches in order to analyze this really large volume of IT operations data that they're collecting. And that opens the door to some really interesting possibilities. So for instance, an organization can begin to pull in revenue information and correlate that with performance. So executives can begin to understand when application performance is actually impacting the bottom line. And that type of correlation can actually also be really interesting to ITOps users and help them really elevate their value within the organization. So if an ITOps team is able to correlate performance issues with revenue, they can use that insight to prioritize incident response, right? They can also pull in additional information. So I've seen some organizations pull in customer or really customer tier information and correlate that with performance so that an ITOps team can discover which performance issues are impacting the most number of high value customers and prioritize responding to those incidents. So again, I'm seeing ITOps, sort of your basic ITOps use cases are driving the initial adoption of platform monitoring tools, but over time, I'm seeing organizations realize some additional use cases and some additional benefits.